I cut the wedding cake with a grin so polished it could have doubled as a mirror, and that's when my phone lit up like a Siren 36 missed calls from the same name, Mom. The message underneath said, "We need to talk." Now, on the happiest day of my life, the people who taught me what love was supposed to look like weren't even in the room. If you've ever felt that particular sting, the one that comes when family wounds you deeper than any stranger could lean in. Tell me where you're tuning in from, and if your story has its own jagged edges. Mine starts long before the cake, before the champagne, before I married the man who chose me without conditions. My name is Nora Bishop. I'm 29. I grew up in Lakefield, a Midwestern town where summers smelled like cut grass and gasoline, and winters taught you to walk with your shoulders tucked against the wind. My parents, Thomas and Elaine, built reputations out of PTA meetings, bake sales, and respectable small talk at block parties. I was their eldest. 3 years behind me came my sister. Piper the child sunlight followed as if on a leash. People called her radiant. Strangers stopped my mother to coo over Piper's copper curls and forest green eyes. At school assemblies, teachers said things like, "Your sister's stage presence is unbelievable, Nora," as if they were offering me dessert. I learned very young that admiration had a sound, applause. And applause, in our house, was a resource Piper controlled. When I was 12, I built a working model of a wind turbine out of foam board and rescued bike parts. It powered a string of Christmas lights and made the science fair judges' eyebrows fly upward in a way that felt like a parade just for me. Mom snapped 2 photos, then hustled us to Piper's jazz recital. "You understand, honey," she murmured, knotting the sculpture ribbon into my ponytail. "We can't be late for your sister's performance." Understanding became my first fluent language. Over the years, the pattern held. I'd win a math league trophy. We'd celebrate by ordering pizza because Piper had choreography rehearsal and there wasn't time for anything else. My parents missed my high school graduation because Piper's regional showcase had been scheduled months in advance. Nora, be reasonable. Dad promised to make it up to me by taking me for pancakes the next morning. He did. He smiled over his coffee and asked for extra syrup, and I pretended both the pancakes and the apology were enough. I left for college on a scholarship that felt like permission to stop auditioning for a family that already had its star. I majored in biomedical design and learned the language of circuits and cartilage, of tensile strength and patience. The professors graded with equal parts mercy and rigor. The models didn't care who Piper was. I built a life there. A thrift store couch, a cheap kettle, friends who answered at 2 a.m., a notebook full of sketches for prosthetics that might make someone's daily life quieter in the places it hurt. That's where I met the person who would change the shape of my future, Caleb Hart. He was tall without being intimidating, handsome without pretending it didn't matter, attentive without keeping score. He laughed with his whole face. The first time we met, he held a door with such unhurried kindness that I had to look up, and when I did, we both startled like we'd each seen a familiar landmark in a strange city. On our 3rd date, I told him about the hierarchy at home. I braced for the polite nod or the syrupy, "I'm sure they love you in their own way." Caleb didn't do either. He reached across the table and said, "That's neglect, Nora." It has a name. He didn't flinch from it. He didn't try to tidy it up. He placed the word in my hands like a tool I could use. Therapy followed DR, Hallie with the soft cardigans and questions that landed with the gentle weight of pebbles in a still pond. "What would it be like to stop auditioning?" she asked. "What would it be like to stop curating your worth for people who refuse to see it?" I wrote those questions on sticky notes and wedged them into textbooks, bathroom mirrors, laptop lids. Meanwhile, Caleb's family folded me in the way you tuck a blanket around someone's shoulders when they fall asleep on the couch. His mother, Diana, texted recipes and thinking of you emojis. His father, Martin, sent me articles about materials science with little "This made me think of your project" comments in the subject line. His sister, Ivy, adopted me immediately, swearing that we would be partners for every trivia night and double date henceforth. No one asked me to shrink to fit. 2 years after that first door held open, Caleb proposed. We were in a planetarium, the lights dimming to reveal a swirl of digital constellations. He'd rented the space after hours, which I learned because the narrator's voice in the dome, usually a baritone explaining Nebula's, became Caleb's own, describing how he fell in love with the way I watched the world. When you look at something, his voice set above us, you examine it like a scientist and adore it like an artist. If you say yes, that's how I'll spend the rest of my life looking at you. The stars shifted into the pattern of a ring. My name arced across a fake sky. The real man I loved knelt with a real ring that fit, as if some jeweler had measured the part of my future that felt like home. Telling my parents should have felt like announcing spring. Instead, it felt like drafting the weather report for a storm I hadn't scheduled. I called on a Sunday afternoon. Mom answered on speakerphone. I could hear dishes clinking, Dad humming, Piper's voice in the background as she practiced something for a showcase. "We're engaged," I said, buoyant because hope, for all its disappointments, is stubborn. Silence fizzed through the line. "Oh," Mom said finally. "Congratulations." "When were you thinking?" Her tone made, when sound like a problem to be solved rather than a joy to be shared. "We're thinking autumn," I said. A small ceremony on the coast. I could hear her inhale, careful not to sound like a sigh. "That's soon," Dad murmured. "Sooner than some, later than others," I said, trying for lightness. "We'll send details." They didn't ask to see the ring. They didn't ask how he did it. Piper's laugh, sharp, delighted, aimed at something that wasn't me, spilled into the phone like a reminder. Caleb and I chose New Harbor, Maine, for the wedding. Cedar shingles, gulls gossiping overhead, a weathered boathouse turned venue with windows that made the sea a guest of honor. We picked dahlias and sea thistle, a string quartet, and a menu of lemon cod and late-season berries. Our guest list capped at 60. It felt intimate, deliberate. Ours. Invitations went out, slate blue envelopes with white ink like salt spray, the return address stamped with a tiny lighthouse ivy designed. We invited my parents, of course. We invited Piper. Weeks passed. No response. I called. "Hey," I said, infusing the word with helium so it would float. "Did you get the invitation?" "We did," Mom answered. "Your father and I are looking into it." "Looking into it," I repeated, as if attending your daughter's wedding required research. "You know how busy things are," she said. "Piper's schedule is packed. There's a lot moving parts." "It's my wedding," I said, not quite pleading, but close. "I'd really love to have you there." "We'll try," she said. The word fell like a coin down a well. I didn't hear it land. They didn't ask about readings or colors or whether Dad would walk me down the aisle. When I brought up the dance, Dad said, "Let me check my calendar," like he was assessing options for a dental cleaning. Sienna, my closest friend since college and the woman who'd be my maid of honor, stepped into the absences my family left like a professional stagehand who knew how to write a listing set. She organized a shower, flipped through bridal consignment racks with me until my hands smelled like old satin, and installed a no catastrophizing jar that ate up quarters every time I said, "What if?" "They'll come through," she promised, tucking a veil against my hair in a mirror smudged with fingerprints and hope, "and if they don't, I will. We all will." Caleb's family did what families are supposed to do, offered help, meant it, and followed through. Diana insisted on making the tiny lemon cookies for the dessert table because store-bought tastes like disappointment. Martin drafted a toast that made me cry in the grocery store. Ivy assembled welcome bags with seashell-shaped soaps and mini bottles of sunscreen and a local map annotated with "best clam roll" and "don't miss this overlook" notes. 2 weeks before the wedding, the ground shifted. I was eating a late lunch at my desk when my phone vibrated. The notification showed Piper's face-a photo she'd taken at some rooftop bar, her hair catching a patch of sunset like she'd bribed the sky. The caption underneath read, "He asked." I said yes. Hashtag forever, hashtag Shasades, hashtag Lena Andrewin. She'd changed her stage name to Lena in the years since high school. It was one more thing people did for her adjust. Comments flooded the post like these to sugar. My mother's was near the top, so thrilled for our baby. "Can't wait to celebrate this weekend." I read that line twice, then again, as if repetition might reveal a different meaning. Celebration this weekend. I called Mom. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, sweetheart. Can I call you back?" "We're a bit Piper's engaged," I said. Congratulations. Why didn't you tell me? Oh, you know how busy you are, she said. We didn't want to add to your plate. My plate? I asked, incredulous. My wedding is in 14 days. Is it? Her feigned confusion was a performance I'd watched her perfect for decades. I thought it was the following weekend. You RSVP'd to the actual date, I said. You sent back the card that said October 9th. Well, she said, stretching the word into something that could hold 1,000 excuses, the engagement party is this Saturday. Just family and close friends. It's been in the works for weeks. How could it have been in the works for weeks, I asked, when they got engaged yesterday? You know how these things are, she said. Sometimes you just know. I stared at the muted city skyline outside my office window and chose my next words carefully. Are you asking me to reschedule my wedding? She didn't inhale in shock. She didn't laugh like I'd made a terrible joke. She said, perfectly reasonably, would it be possible? We've put deposits down on the venue for Piper's party. People have rearranged their schedules. It would be such a shame. Mom, I said, and this time the word cracked. We have a contract. 60 people have booked travel. This isn't a potluck. We'll try to make it to part of your ceremony, she offered. Maybe we can split the day. We'll come for the vows, then drive back for the toasts. 2 hours apart, I said. Across state lines. Nora, please don't be difficult, she said, and I heard at the familiar pivot where my insistence on basic respect became rudeness in her retelling. After we hung up, I walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and pressed my forehead to the cool metal partition until the anger turned into something I could stand upright with. I called Sienna. That's obscene, she said. I'm not being dramatic. It's obscene. We're not moving your wedding. If they choose a party over your vows, that's on them. That night, Caleb listened with his jaw tight and his hands gentle when I told him. We're still getting married, he said, steady as a metronome. If your side of the room is empty, then we'll dance harder on mine. I texted Piperlina to the internet. Congratulations. I would have loved to hear directly from you. Is there any chance you can move your party? I want you with me on my wedding day. Hours later, she replied, thanks. Everything's booked. Maybe swing by after your reception? We're going late. The next morning, my father called, his voice full of careful politeness. Your mother needs my help with logistics on Saturday, he said. You know how she gets when there's a timeline. More than I know how you get when your eldest daughter asks you to show up, I asked. He didn't answer the question I actually asked. He said, a wedding lasts a few hours. A sister lasts a lifetime. People always say that like it's wisdom and not a weapon. The week before the wedding was a study in absences. No confirmation from my parents about the rehearsal. No photo of the dress my mother had bought to wear. No joking voicemail from my father about practicing his dance moves. The night of the rehearsal dinner, we waited until the sun bent low and the chill came up from the harbor, then began without them. The officiant, our friend Marcus, who had once lent me a drill and never asked me to return it, talked us through the steps while Ivy pinned my hair back, and Allison, a college roommate I hadn't seen much since graduation, but had invited anyway, handed me a glass of water like a nurse backstage. We went to the restaurant anyway. The host looked at the empty chairs with a sympathy that didn't spill over into pity. We'll take these out, she said softly, whisking away the placeholders with names that shouldn't have been pretend. We toasted anyway. We told stories anyway. I laughed at Martin's joke about lemon zest and cried quietly in the restroom where the lights were unflattering and the paper towels were surprisingly soft. At 10:12, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Busy with party prep tomorrow. Hope rehearsal went well. Love you. The words sat there like magnets that refused to stick to anything. In the hotel room that night, Sienna texted to check on me. I stared at the blinking cursor and forced myself to write, I'm okay. See you in the morning. The reply came fast, about that family emergency. Might be a bit late. Don't worry. I'll be there before the ceremony. I stared at the screen, felt the old splinter of dread wedge itself under the nail of my calm, and told it to hush. Sleep took me like a wave. Fear carried me under. I woke before dawn with the specific ache of a dream in which all your shoes vanish and you're late for the exam. At 9 on the dot, 2 stylists arrived with rolling cases like magicians' trunks. They turned me into a version of myself I recognized and admired, hair pinned into a gentle twist, liner that showed off the blue in my eyes, lipstick like a whispered secret. Sienna hadn't arrived. She didn't answer her phone. When she finally texted, it was a single line, "So sorry won't make it." Then, as if she'd ripped the bandage off and couldn't look, nothing else. "Replacement maid of honor?" Ivy asked, eyes wide with concern and mischief, and before I could answer, there was a knock. Allison, an old roommate I hadn't seen in a year, but had invited anyway, stood there with coffee and bagels and a look on her face that said, "Try me." "I heard," she said when I blinked at her. "Can I help?" She was half in the room before I could reply, delegating like a benevolent general. "Ivy, adjust that strap." "Nora, sip this." "Stylists, you're witches in the best sense. Let's move." When we arrived at the venue, the air smelled like brine and cedar. The quartet tuned. Someone laughed on the lawn. I gave my phone to Allison. "If Mom texts again," I said, "tell her I'll read it after." Robert Caleb's father appeared in the doorway in a tuxedo that hung better than any suit has a right to. "I know I'm not your father," he said, voice catching, "but if you want an arm to take you down the aisle." I thought of my actual father, of his good intentions and bad follow-through, of the way he always found the softest excuse and called it duty. I thought of Martin's hands when he'd once taught me how to properly slice an onion, patient and precise. I would be honored, I told him. He blinked rapidly and offered his arm. When the music started, my stomach did the roller coaster drop and then calmed as soon as I saw Caleb. That's what love does when it's right. It quiets you without making you smaller. We said vows we'd written, promises braided with humor and truth. "I choose your chaos and your order," he said, and I replied, "I choose your certainty and your questions." Marcus pronounced us married, and the room made the noise of people who believe in something together. We danced to a jazz standard that wasn't famous enough to be cliché. We ate. We toasted. We took photos with friends who had driven farther than my parents and showed up harder. We laughed until my cheeks hurt. Then cake. A three-tiered thing that looked like it had surrendered to a meadow edged with herbs and studs of candied citrus, buttercream smoothed to a soft shine. As we pressed the knife through the bottom tier, my phone hummed against the secret pocket in my dress like a trapped bee. Allison leaned in. "Ignore," she whispered. I didn't. I pulled it out and saw the screen, the same name repeated, once, twice, 36 times. The message, "We need to talk." Now, Caleb saw my face. "Do you want a dash?" "I'll be 5 minutes," I said. "Or less. If it's nothing, I'm back. If it's something, I still come back." He kissed my forehead like benediction. Outside, the wind lifted my veil the way someone mischievous might tug a ribbon. I called. Mom answered instantly. "Thank God," she said. "Nora, listen. It's Piper." Rowan called off the engagement. He stood up in front of everyone and said he couldn't marry someone who did what she did. He said she admitted it. "About you." "Admitted what?" I asked, though my bones already knew. They'd known for months, maybe years. "She told us you didn't want us at your wedding," Mom said, voice shaking. "She showed us messages, fake messages. She told us you changed the date without telling us. She intercepted your invitation. She deleted your voicemails from our phones when we weren't looking." Oh, Nora. We believed her. The air shifted around me, suddenly thinner. "You believed her over me," I said, because naming things gives them boundaries. "We did," Dad said quietly. He was on speaker. "Of course some habits can't be broken even in crisis. And we're sorry. We're so sorry. We're at the party venue, and it's all falling apart. People are leaving. Your sister ran out. We've been calling and calling. Please. Can we see you? Tonight, they wanted absolution on my wedding day." I should have hung up. I should have said what every boundary book tells you to say. "We can talk when I'm ready." But a different plan, already in motion, clicked into place like a code executing, because I hadn't been as naive as they thought. 2 weeks earlier, after the overt ask to reschedule my wedding for a party my fear had curdled into discernment, I'd compiled everything. RSVP screenshots, postage receipts, a spreadsheet of calls I'd made that went unanswered, even a photo of my stamped invitation addressed to my parents. I'd noticed tiny inconsistencies in the texts from me Mom had forwarded with confusion quotation marks facing the wrong direction, a single emoji I never used, a timestamp that didn't match my phone's general habits. The mistakes were small but loud to someone who knew how I typed. I had written an email factual, timestamped addressed to Rowan, to my parents, and to myself, with attachments and a note that read, "Because truth arrives late in my family, here it is on time. It was scheduled to send at 8 p.m. On my wedding night if I didn't cancel it by 6 o'clock. I didn't cancel. I was cutting cake at 8:02 when the email left the outbox and collided with a party built on confetti and lies. I didn't tell my parents that part on the phone. Not yet. Revenge is most satisfying when it looks like justice and feels like inevitability. We'll be at the hotel at 11, I said. If you want to talk, be on time. Then I hung up, tucked the phone back into its pocket, and walked inside to kiss my husband. The rest of the reception exists in my memory like stained glass, bright pieces, dark lead, an image made while light pours through. I told Caleb what happened, and his mouth opened and closed once before he said, "Of course she did. We danced so hard my hair came loose." Ivy cried when she hugged me, muttering, "I knew something stank." Allison took the microphone and said, to Nora, who walks through fire in heels and still finds a way to light the room. People clinked glasses. Someone started a conga line that mercifully died after 4 people. At 10:45, we made our exit under paper stars. The hotel lobbies smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee. At 11 on the dot, my parents walked in. They looked smaller than I remembered, deflated by the weight of what they'd upheld and what had collapsed. We went into a small conference room where the carpet tried to be cheerful and the walls tried to be neutral. Caleb sat beside me. I folded my hands and waited. Mom started crying before she spoke. "We were wrong," she said. "I'm so ashamed." "Shame can be a map," I said, hearing Dr. Howley in the back of my mind. "If you let it." Dad cleared his throat. "What Piper did, it's monstrous." "Yes," I said. "And what you did believing the worst thing about me because it was easier than inventorying your history with me, that's not nothing." He flinched. "You thought you deserved my rejection." I finished because therapy had taught me how to lace together the strands. You knew, on some level, what you'd given me and what you hadn't. But instead of calling to confirm, instead of checking your certainty against reality, you accepted a story that punished you and erased me. That's not love. That's cowardice. We sat with that. Silence has its own forked tongue. It can accuse. It can absolve. This one waited. "Your email," Mom whispered finally. "The evidence. We saw the metadata. We saw our own call logs. We should have seen you." "I didn't send it to hurt you," I said, which was almost true. "I sent it because I knew the truth wouldn't get safe passage if I asked Piper to escort it." "We will do whatever you want," Dad said. "Therapy. Restitution. Apologies. All of it. I want boundaries," I said. "Real ones. I want you to acknowledge that if you are in my life, it will be on terms that don't require me to negotiate my humanity. I want you to stop letting Piper set the narrative temperature in every room you enter. And I want you to apologize in a way that names specifics." "We will," Mom said. "We will." "And Piper needs treatment," I said. "Compassion isn't a hall pass. She needs a professional who isn't afraid of her tears." They nodded. We all breathed. I did not accept or reject the apology. I placed it on the table between us like a fragile figurine we could come back to later. Caleb and I went upstairs and lay in a bed scattered with rose petals somebody kind had sprinkled before we arrived. We laughed, because what else do you do when the day you'll tell your grandchildren about includes a trapdoor? "Happy wedding," he whispered. "Happy wedding," I said, and sleep finally came without bargaining. 6 months later, the edges of that day had dulled enough to examine without bleeding. We'd returned from a honeymoon where we ate fruit that tasted like it still remembered the tree. We'd settled into married, life-shared grocery lists, shared calendars, shared playlists for cleaning the apartment. We'd hung the photograph Ivy took of us laughing with our foreheads pressed together, bright wind whipping my veil into a white question mark. My parents started therapy. They asked me to join them with DR. "Hallie sometimes," I said yes sometimes and no other times and didn't apologize for either answer. Dad learned how to say, I made a mistake, without adding a weather report about his intentions. Mom practiced leaving silences alone instead of padding them with excuses. None of it changed the past. Some of it changed the temperature of our present. Piperlina fell off the map for a while. She called from a number I didn't recognize 2 months after the wedding and said, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the address of the starting line. We met at a cafe that sold croissants shaped like armor. She looked tired, like someone who'd been running from a dog that wasn't there. I liked the way the world looked at me when I was the tragedy, she admitted. I liked what it made me. I liked that people forgot to ask whether I'd set the fire. Therapy, she said, was teaching her that attention is a drug with a short half-life. Sienna sent flowers and emails and messages with subject lines like, please read. I didn't. When I finally answered a month later, I said, you chose rumors over our history. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. Her reply was short. You're right. I'm sorry. We rebuilt slowly, which is to say we didn't rebuild in the same shape. Sometimes we go for coffee. Sometimes she sends a meme. Often weeks go by where neither of us reaches. It doesn't ache as much as I expected. Allison, the woman who brought bagels and yes energy on my wedding morning, became exactly what you think she became, a piece of chosen family. We text about everything from toenail polish to tax deductions. She keeps an extra toothbrush at my place for the nights a movie runs long and she's too sleepy to Uber home. Piece by piece, we made a life that made sense. On our first anniversary, we rented the little planetarium where Caleb proposed and watched the same star show, just us, no speeches. Afterward, in our kitchen, he cleared his throat and said, I want you to see something. He handed me a small black box. Inside was a pendant silver, delicate, a circle with a tiny stone suspended like a planet. The back was engraved, still choosing. I cried, obviously. We were going to tell our families that night that I was pregnant. We lit candles, plated cake, and waited. My parents arrived with a scrapbook Mom had made of every achievement of mine she'd failed to celebrate in real time. She narrated each page and didn't make excuses for what's missing. I can't replace what I didn't do, she said, but I can honor it now. Dad took out a letter, a real one, written by hand, apologizing not in bulk, but line by line, for the times he handed me a paper napkin when I'd needed a life raft. He did not ask me to reassure him that he was a good father anyway. Piper came last. She brought a small ceramic lighthouse she'd made in a pottery class, lopsided and hopeful. It's not for decoration, she said. It's a reminder. I'm trying to be a person who shows people the rocks we told them we were expecting. There was joy. For once, Piper didn't angle the spotlight onto herself. Mom asked how I felt and then listened. Dad took out his phone not to check scores, but to add my next appointment to his calendar with an alert labeled Show Up. Caleb squeezed my hand under the table. Later, when we were alone, he asked, Are you peaceful? I thought about it. I thought about the map shame can be, about boundaries that hold like shoreline, about revenge that looks like truth arriving right on time. I am, I said. Not because everything's fixed. Because I know I'm not up for audition anymore. If you're still listening, if you've walked with me from cake to metadata to croissants shaped like armor, here's the part some of you came for. The revenge. I didn't scream. I didn't set anyone's clothes on fire. I didn't deliver a speech at Piper's collapsed party. My revenge was a scheduled email full of facts. My revenge was a room at 11 o'clock where I told my parents the truth they'd avoided. My revenge was a life built so carefully they could no longer claim I must have misunderstood what love should feel like. But because I know that tidy justice is rare and reality prefers complicated, I'll also tell you this. 6 months after our anniversary, Piper relapsed into the performance of victimhood long enough to post a story implying I was freezing her out of. My pregnancy. The old ache flashed its light. The difference now? My parents didn't share it. They shut it down. My father commented, not true. We were with Nora yesterday. This narrative ends here. My mother called me first, not Piper. That's revenge too. A family that finally learns where the truth lives. On the day our son was born, The hospital window framed a square of winter sky so blue it looked backlit. I held him and thought, I will not make him earn his place. Caleb cried and laughed and talked to him like an old friend. My parents waited until we said, come, then arrived with food we could eat with one hand and left when we said, we're tired. Piper sent a text that read, congrats. I'm working on being the aunt who asks what you need, not the one who tells you what you feel. Sometimes, late at night, I open the folder on my computer labeled Truth. It holds the screenshots, the exports, the notes I took in the months when my reality gaslighted itself under the weight of other people's certainty. I keep it not because I plan to use it again, but because it reminds me who I am when I am most clear. The woman who doesn't set fires, but does flip on the lights. The woman who doesn't collect apologies like trophies, but does demand them like keys. To a door that leads forward. If your family didn't show up for you, if your friend chose spectacle over loyalty, if you're standing in a dress with a pocket buzzing like a trapped bee hear me, you are not required to move your wedding for someone else's party. You are not required to turn the other cheek so hard you sprain your neck. You're allowed to deliver the truth like a well-timed email and then go dance with the people who came because they love you, not because the spotlight told them to. Tell me in the comments how you handled your own moment of revelation. Did you choose the quick satisfaction of rage or the slow victory of being exactly who you said you would be? Either way, you're here. And that's the beginning of everything. Thank you for listening to my story. If it found you on a day you needed reminding that you're not an audition, I'm glad. I hope you build a harbor where you are chosen daily and the only things you have to prove are recipes and riddles and whether you can still laugh when the cake knife catches the light and your phone buzzes with a past that no longer gets to rewrite. This is Nora, still choosing. And that's my favorite revenge.